The night was supposed to be quiet, just another evening in a small town where everyone knew each other, or at least they thought they did. But under the cover of darkness, a group of men crept toward an old Victorian house on the corner of Maple Street, their hands gripping cans of spray paint, rocks, and something far more dangerous: hatred. They had no idea who lived there. All they saw was a black woman moving into a neighborhood where they believed she didn't belong. In their minds, they were sending a message, making sure she knew she wasn't welcome. What they didn't know was that they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. Inside the house, Nyla sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea, her back straight, her eyes sharp. She was used to quiet. She had trained herself to listen in the silence. But tonight something felt off. The faint crunch of footsteps on gravel, the hushed whispers just beyond the window. Then, crash! A rock slammed through the glass, landing inches away from her feet. Nyla didn't flinch. She had seen far worse. She had been in places where every second was a matter of life or death. These men had no idea who they were messing with. Because before she had moved into this town, before she had decided to start over, she had been someone else. Someone whose name was whispered with both fear and respect in places these men couldn't even imagine. She had been the most dangerous Special Forces operative the military had ever seen, but before that secret could be revealed, in another part of town, a young black teen named Jamal was making a decision that would change his life forever. He was on the city bus, tired from school and work, earbuds in, staring at the world outside. When the doors opened, an elderly, pregnant woman stepped in, looking exhausted, her hand resting on her stomach as she glanced around for a seat. Jamal didn't hesitate. Without thinking twice, he pulled out his earbuds, stood up, and offered his seat. She looked at him, really looked at him, as if she saw something deeper than just a polite teenager. Then, with a small smile, she sat down and handed him a folded note. Jamal stuffed it in his pocket, not thinking much of it. But when he got home and opened it, his hand started shaking. What he read would change his life forever. Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, his heart pounding as he unfolded the note with slightly shaky fingers. The paper felt worn, as if it had been held tightly for a long time before it reached him. His eyes scanned the words, and with each line, his breath caught in his throat. "You don't know me, but I've been looking for you. You did something kind today, something small, but it meant more than you can imagine. I owe you a debt, and now I'm going to change your life. Meet me at the address below tomorrow at 4 p.m. Come alone." Jamal stared at the note, his mind racing. Who was this woman? And why would she say she owed him? He had just given up his seat. It wasn't that big of a deal. People did that all the time, didn't they? He flipped the note over, looking for more clues, but all that was there was a neatly written address. He didn't recognize the street name, but something about it felt important. He thought about showing it to his mom, but she already had enough to worry about. She worked 2 jobs, barely had time to sleep, and the last thing she needed was to stress over some mysterious note. No, this was something he had to figure out on his own. Meanwhile, across town, Nyla remained still in her kitchen, listening. She could hear the men outside, their laughter low and cruel, their voices filled with arrogance. They thought they were in control. They thought she would be scared. They were wrong. She exhaled slowly and moved to the broken window, stepping over the shattered glass without hesitation. She could hear them whispering, daring each other to do more, to push further. A spray can hissed outside, and she knew they were defacing her home, trying to send a message, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Nyla had spent years in the shadows, mastering skills that most people could only dream of. She had been trained to blend in, to observe, to strike, only when necessary. The only reason she had left that life behind was because she wanted peace. She wanted to be normal, but normal wasn't in her destiny. She moved through her house with purpose, reaching for something hidden in the back of a cabinet. A simple black box. She opened it carefully, her fingers brushing over the contents, remnants of her past. Dog tags, a folded-up letter, a photograph of people who weren't here anymore, and something else. Her fingers closed around it, and for the first time in a long while, she felt that familiar energy surge through her. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't angry. She was ready. Outside, the men were still laughing, still taunting, still too cocky to realize their mistake. But they were about to learn. Back in his small bedroom, Jamal ran his fingers over the note again, memorizing the address. He pulled out his phone and typed it into the map app. The location popped up, an old building on the other side of town. He frowned. That area wasn't bad, but it wasn't the kind of place you just went to without knowing why. A weird feeling settled in his stomach. Was this some kind of prank? But something told him it wasn't. The woman had looked at him like she knew him, like she saw something in him he didn't even see in himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just a bus ride. His fingers hovered over his phone screen. He could text his best friend, let him know where he was going just in case. But no, something about this felt personal. If he was going to figure it out, he had to go alone. The next day, the air was heavy with the promise of rain. Jamal left school and started walking toward the address, his steps slow, his mind running through every possibility. When he reached the building, he hesitated. It was old but well kept, with a sign above the door that had faded over time. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. A woman was waiting for him, but it wasn't the pregnant woman from the bus. This woman was younger, maybe in her 30s, with sharp eyes that studied him the second he entered. "You came," she said, her voice even. Jamal nodded. "Yeah, what is this about?" The woman motioned for him to sit. He hesitated, but did as she said. The room was small, with only a desk and a few chairs, no windows. Just the two of them. The woman leaned forward, her gaze locking onto his. "You think what you did yesterday was small, don't you?" Jamal shrugged. "I mean, yeah. It was just a seat." She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "It's knowing. That woman you gave your seat to, she's not just anybody. And she didn't find you by accident." Jamal's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" The woman reached into a folder on the desk and pulled out a photo. She slid it across to him. Jamal picked it up, his eyes widening. It was a picture of the woman from the bus. But she wasn't pregnant in this photo. She was standing next to a man in a military uniform, and the man looked a lot like him. Jamal's breath hitched. "Who is this?" The woman folded her hands. "That's your father." Jamal's mind spun. That wasn't possible. His father had been gone his whole life. His mom never talked about him, just said he wasn't around. And now a stranger was sitting across from him, telling him something he couldn't begin to process. The woman watched his reaction carefully. "You've been kept in the dark for a long time, Jamal. But that changes now." Jamal's hands tightened around the photo. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of his chest. He wanted to ask a million questions, but he couldn't find the words, because deep down, something in him already knew. Across town, in the quiet of her home, Neela stood near the door, listening as the men outside started to realize something was wrong. Their laughter had faded. Their bravado was slipping, and for the first time that night they felt what she wanted them to feel. Fear. Because the hunted had just become the hunter, and she was ready. Jamal sat frozen, gripping the photo as his mind tried to make sense of what he had just heard. His father. He had never seen a picture of him before, never even heard his mother say his name. It was like he had never existed. But now, this stranger was telling him that everything he thought he knew was a lie. His throat felt dry. "That's not possible," he muttered. "My dad, he left. He's not around." The woman across from him studied him carefully. "That's what you were told. But the truth is, your father didn't leave. He was taken." Jamal frowned. "Taken? What does that even mean?" The woman leaned back, crossing her arms. "Your father was part of something bigger than you realize. He wasn't just in the military. He was in a classified unit, one that didn't officially exist. And when he got too close to something dangerous, he disappeared. Jamal shook his head. This sounded like some kind of conspiracy theory, not real life. Why should I believe any of this? You don't even know me. The woman slid another document across the table. This one had his name on it, his full name. It was some kind of file, and as he scanned it, he saw details about his life that no stranger should know. His school, his part-time job, even the fact that he liked to doodle in the margins of his notebooks. "We've been watching you," she admitted. "Not in a creepy way, but because we knew this day was coming. You weren't supposed to find out like this, but when you helped that woman on the bus, it accelerated everything. She wasn't just anyone, Jamal. She's someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." Jamal's pulse pounded in his ears. "Why? What does she want from me?" The woman hesitated, as if deciding how much to tell him. "She wants to finish what your father started, and she needs your help." Jamal's hands curled into fists. This was too much, too sudden. His entire life, he had been just another kid trying to make it through school, trying not to cause trouble, trying to keep his head down. But now he was being pulled into something bigger than himself, and he wasn't sure he was ready. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Nyla stepped through the broken glass of her own front porch. The men who had vandalized her home were starting to realize something was wrong. Their bravado had faded. They kept glancing over their shoulders, shifting uneasily, as if they could feel a presence they hadn't noticed before. Nyla had been trained to hunt in silence. She knew how to move like a shadow, how to control her breathing, how to make someone feel watched without ever revealing herself. And right now, these men, these cowards, were feeling it. One of them, a man with a thick jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, turned to his friend. "Maybe we should go." His voice wavered, and Nyla could hear the uncertainty creeping in. The other one scoffed. "Why? What's she gonna do? Call the cops?" He turned back toward the house and lifted the spray can again, but before he could press down on the nozzle, something whizzed past his ear. A small object, a coin, embedded itself in the wooden railing beside him. He flinched, his head snapping toward the shadows. "What the?" But Nyla was already moving. Before they could react, she stepped out from the darkness, her presence sudden, controlled, deliberate. The way she moved, the way she carried herself, it made their instincts scream at them to run, but fear kept them rooted in place. "You think you know who I am," she said, her voice even. "You don't." The man in the baseball cap swallowed hard. "Look, we were just messing around, it's no big deal." Nyla tilted her head. "No big deal." She took a slow step forward, and the men instinctively backed up. "Breaking into my property, destroying my home? Tell me, if someone did, that to your family would it be no big deal?" The other man clenched his fists, trying to regain his confidence. "Lady, you need to relax." Wrong choice of words. In a flash, Nyla moved. 1 second she was standing in place, the next, she was inches from him. He barely had time to react before she grabbed his wrist. Not hard, not enough to hurt, but firm enough to send a message. Her grip was like iron. "Relax," she repeated, her voice low. "Do I look like someone who relaxes?" The man tried to pull his arm back, but he couldn't. She wasn't just strong. She was controlled. He could feel it in the way she held him, in the way she looked at him, like she was calculating every possible outcome in real time. The first man panicked. Hey, let's just go. We didn't mean anything by it." Nyla held the grip for a second longer before letting go. The man stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, his breath unsteady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This is your only warning," she said. "You don't come back here, you don't look in my direction, and you don't speak my name." The men didn't need to be told twice. They turned and hurried away, practically tripping over themselves in their rush to get out of there. Nyla watched them go, her face unreadable. She knew their type. They would talk big, act tough, but deep down, they were weak. And weak people made mistakes. She wasn't worried about them, but she was worried about what their actions meant. Because if they had come after her, It meant someone had sent them. Someone who knew who she was. Someone who wanted to make sure she didn't stay quiet. And that meant trouble. Back at the mysterious office, Jamal leaned forward, his mind still spinning. What does this have to do with me? Why now? The woman sighed. Because the people who took your father, they think you know something. Jamal's eyes widened. I don't know anything. She gave him a look. Maybe not yet, but they don't know that. Jamal felt the weight of her words settle over him. He had spent his whole life feeling like he was just another kid, just another face in the crowd. But now, people he had never met were watching him, making plans around him, pulling him into a world he didn't understand. And worst of all, he had a feeling there was no turning back.